Welcome to Office Revenge Hub. Relax and enjoy the story.
I stayed late every single night for 3 years, and they didn't notice what I was really doing until it was too late. My name is Daniel Park, and for 3 years I was a data analyst at Horizon Marketing Group, a mid-sized advertising agency in Chicago. I wasn't in a glamorous role. I didn't interface with clients or pitch creative campaigns. I worked in the basement office, analyzing campaign performance data, building reports, and maintaining the databases that made everyone else's jobs possible. I was invisible, the person who made the machine run but never got credit for it. When I started at Horizon, I was excited. I'd just finished my master's in data science. I wanted to use my skills to solve real business problems. Horizon seemed like the perfect opportunity. They were growing fast, and what they needed someone to bring structure to their data operations. My boss was the VP of Analytics, a woman named Catherine Morris. She was polished, articulate, and constantly in meetings with senior leadership. She hired me with big promises about how data was becoming central to Horizon's strategy. She said I'd be building something important, that my work would directly impact how the company made decisions. I believed her. My first few months were overwhelming. Horizon's data infrastructure was a complete mess. They had spreadsheets everywhere, duplicate databases, no standardized reporting. Different departments tracked the same metrics differently. I spent 60-hour weeks cleaning it up. I built a centralized data warehouse. I created automated reporting dashboards. And I standardized how we tracked campaign performance across all clients. It was tedious work. Nobody saw it or appreciated it, but I knew it mattered. Catherine would occasionally check in. She'd ask if I was making progress. I'd show her what I'd built. She'd nod and say good work, then disappear back into her meetings. I didn't need constant praise. I just wanted to do good work. By month 6, my data infrastructure was running smoothly. Campaign managers could pull reports in minutes instead of days. Account executives had real-time performance dashboards. Senior leadership had clean data for strategic planning. Horizon's revenue grew 30% that year. Everyone credited the creative team and the account management team. Nobody mentioned that the data systems enabling those teams had been built by me. That was fine. I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it because I cared about excellence. I started staying late most nights, not because anyone asked me to, but because I saw opportunities to improve things. I'd build new analytics models. I'd optimize database queries. I'd create predictive tools that helped account managers forecast campaign performance. I'd leave the office around 8 or 9 most nights, sometimes later. My girlfriend Jamie would text asking when I'd be home. I'd say soon. Then I'd get absorbed in solving some technical problem and lose track of time. Jamie was patient at first. She understood I was building my career. But after a year of me coming home late and working weekends, she started getting frustrated. She'd ask why I was working so hard for a company that barely acknowledged I existed. I'd say it wasn't about acknowledgement. It was about building something I was proud of. She'd say I should be proud of having a life outside work too. She wasn't wrong, but I didn't know how to stop. I'd become addicted to the process of building and improving. Year 2, Horizon won a major account, a national retail chain worth $15 million annually. It was the biggest client in the company's history. The CEO gave a speech at the company meeting. He thanked the sales team for landing the client. He thanked the creative team for developing the winning pitch. He thanked Catherine for providing the data insights that proved our approach worked. I'd built every piece of analysis Catherine had presented in that pitch. I'd spent 3 weeks modeling different campaign scenarios. I'd created visualizations that made complex data accessible. Catherine hadn't built anything. She'd just presented my work. But in that moment, I told myself it was fine. That's how organizations work. Managers get credit for their team's output. I was the team. My work had contributed to a major win. That should be enough. The retail account meant more work for everyone. Campaign managers were overwhelmed. Account executives were stretched thin, and I was expected to provide even more detailed reporting and analysis. I started staying until 10 or 11 most nights. I'd work through lunch, I'd come in on Saturdays. Jamie started asking if we were okay, if I was choosing work over our relationship. I said I was just in a busy period. Things would calm down. They never did. Catherine got promoted to Senior Vice President. The CEO praised her vision for how data was transforming Horizon's capabilities. She got a massive raise and a corner office. She called me into her office the day after her promotion. She said she appreciated my hard work. She was giving me a 5% raise and a new title, Senior Data Analyst. 5%. After 2 years of 60-hour weeks, building the entire data infrastructure that made her promotion possible. I thanked her. I didn't know what else to do. She said she had high expectations for the senior analyst role. She needed me to take on more responsibility. Lead some of the junior analysts we'd be hiring. I said, we were hiring more analysts? Catherine said yes, the team was growing. We'd have 3 new people starting over the next 2 months. I felt a small surge of hope. Maybe with more people I could finally have a sustainable workload. Maybe I could have a life again. The new analysts started, 2 recent graduates and 1 person with a few years of experience. I was asked to train them. I spent weeks getting them up to speed, teaching them our systems, showing them how to build reports and run analyses. It meant I fell behind on my own work, so I started staying even later. 11 o'clock became midnight. I'd get home and Jamie would already be asleep. We stopped having real conversations. Our relationship became logistical coordination. Who was buying groceries, when rent was due, brief exchanges that felt more like roommates than partners. I knew it was bad. I just didn't know how to fix it. 3 months after the new analyst started, Catherine restructured the team. She made one of the new hires, a guy named Brett, who'd gone to the same business school as her, the lead analyst. He'd been there for 3 months. I'd been there for almost 3 years. I'd built everything. Brett barely understood how our systems worked. Catherine said Brett had leadership potential. She wanted to develop him. I asked what that meant for me. She said I'd report to Brett now. Same title, same responsibilities, but he'd be managing the team's workflow and interfacing with senior leadership. I'd be doing the technical work, while Brett took credit for it, just like Catherine had been doing with my work for years. I felt something crack inside me, but I didn't say anything. I just nodded and went back to my desk. Brett immediately started changing things. He wanted daily status updates. Now he wanted detailed documentation of every analysis I ran. He wanted to review my work before it went to stakeholders. He didn't understand the work well enough to actually review it. He'd just add meaningless comments or ask me to change formatting to make it look like he'd contributed. I started staying late, not just to do my actual work, but to deal with Brett's bureaucratic requirements. Jamie left me 4 months later. She said she'd been patient. She tried to be supportive, but I'd chosen work over her for too long. She deserved a partner who was actually present. I wanted to argue, to promise I'd change, but I couldn't. She was right. I'd let my job consume my entire life, and I didn't even like my job anymore. The apartment felt enormous and empty without her. I'd come home from work at midnight to complete silence. One I'd order takeout and eat alone while mindlessly watching TV. I'd wake up the next morning and do it all again. Work became the only structure in my life, the only thing that gave my days meaning. Even though it was grinding me down, I started making mistakes. Small ones at first, typos in reports, wrong filters in dashboards, nothing catastrophic. but not the flawless work I'd been producing for years. Brett would point out every error in our one-on-ones. He'd say he was concerned about my performance, that I needed to focus better. I wanted to tell him I was making mistakes because I was burned out from doing 3 people's work while he took credit. But I didn't. I just said I'd do better. Catherine called me into her office 6 months after Jamie left. She said we needed to discuss my performance trajectory. She said I'd been a strong contributor initially, but lately my work quality had declined. She was seeing mistakes, missing deadlines. She needed to see improvement. I asked if she'd considered that maybe I was overworked, that I'd been working 60 to 70-hour weeks for 3 years with minimal support. Catherine said everyone at Horizon worked hard. That was the culture. If I wasn't capable of handling the workload, maybe this wasn't the right fit. I felt my chest tighten. I'd sacrificed everything for this company, my relationship, my health, my early 30s. And now I was being told I wasn't working hard enough. I asked what would happen if my performance didn't improve. Catherine said we'd have to discuss whether this role still made sense for me. She was threatening to fire me. I left her office in a daze. Now I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen. I didn't know what to do. That night I stayed until 2 a.m, not because I had urgent work, but because I was afraid to go home, afraid to sit alone in my apartment, thinking about how completely I'd failed at life. I pulled up some old files, analyses I'd done years ago, the retail client pitch, the data models that had driven major strategic decisions, the infrastructure I'd built. Everything important at Horizon ran on systems I'd created. Everything, and I was the only person who truly understood how it all worked. I'd documented things, but documentation only captures what you decide to write down. It doesn't capture the thousands of small decisions and workarounds that make complex systems actually function. The new analyst didn't know any of that. Brett certainly didn't. Catherine definitely didn't. I was the single point of failure for Horizon's entire data operation, and they were threatening to fire me. That's when something shifted. I'd been treating this job like a calling, like my identity was tied to being excellent at work. But Horizon had never seen me that way. I was just a resource, useful when I produced, disposable when I didn't meet expectations. If I was disposable to them, why was I killing myself to make them successful? I made a decision that night, a quiet, calm decision. I was going to leave Horizon, but I was going to do it on my terms. And I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd taken for granted. I started documenting everything the next day, not for Horizon, for myself. I created detailed maps of every database, every data pipeline, every reporting system I'd built. I saved them to my personal cloud storage. I also started documenting all the shortcuts and workarounds I'd implemented, the things that made the systems actually work, but that no one else knew about. I didn't sabotage anything, I just stopped fixing problems proactively. Before, if I noticed a data feed was getting slow, I'd optimize it immediately. Now I'd let it slow down until someone complained. Before, if I saw data quality issues, I'd fix them before they affected reports. Now I'd let the bad data flow through. Before, I'd anticipate what analyses stakeholders needed and build them in advance. Now I'd wait to be asked. I did exactly what was requested of me, nothing more. My working hours dropped from 70 a week to 40. I left at 5:30 every day. Now I stopped checking email at night. Brett noticed immediately. He asked why I wasn't staying late anymore. I said I was focusing on work-life balance like HR had recommended in their wellness initiative. He said some projects required extra effort. I needed to be flexible. I said I was happy to discuss adjusting my workload if 40 hours wasn't sufficient to complete my assigned tasks. Brett didn't know how to respond. He couldn't formally require me to work overtime, so he just looked frustrated and told me to make sure I hit my deadlines. I hit every deadline, but I stopped doing all the invisible work that made everything else possible. Within 2 weeks, things started breaking. Reports that account managers relied on started showing wrong numbers, not because I'd sabotaged them, but because I'd stopped maintaining the complex data transformations that made them accurate. Dashboards started loading slowly, not because I'd changed anything, but because I'd stopped optimizing the database queries. Forecasting models started producing inconsistent results, not because of any action I took, but because I'd stopped doing the manual data cleaning that made them work. Brett started having daily panic meetings about data quality issues. He'd ask me what was wrong. I'd explain the technical problems. He wouldn't understand. He'd just demand I fix them. I'd fix exactly what he asked me to fix. But each fix revealed 3 other problems that I'd been silently preventing for years. It was like watching a dam crumble. 1 leak becomes 10, becomes 100. Catherine called me into her office 3 weeks into my new approach. She said there were serious concerns about data reliability. She needed to understand what was happening. I explained calmly and professionally. I'd been maintaining numerous manual processes to compensate for infrastructure limitations. I'd been doing that work outside my core responsibilities, often outside business hours. Now that I was focusing on my assigned tasks during business hours, those maintenance activities weren't happening. The underlying infrastructure problems were becoming visible. Catherine asked why I hadn't documented these processes. I said I had. I'd documented the systems themselves, but the ongoing maintenance wasn't a formal process. It was just me noticing problems and fixing them before they became issues. Catherine said I needed to document everything immediately, train the team to handle the maintenance. I said I could create documentation, but implementation would require significant dedicated time, either from me or from the other analysts. Given current workloads, that would mean some projects would need to be delayed. Catherine's face went hard. She said delaying client work wasn't an option. I needed to figure out how to maintain everything while delivering on commitments. I said respectfully that I'd been doing exactly that for 3 years by working 70-hour weeks. But she'd recently expressed concern about my work-life balance. I was trying to find a sustainable approach. She didn't have a response. She just dismissed me. I went back to my desk and kept doing exactly what I'd been doing. 40-hour weeks. Assigned tasks only. No invisible maintenance. The problems got worse. A major client report went out with wrong revenue numbers. The mistake was caught when the client's team noticed the data didn't match their internal records. Account executives panicked. The client was furious. Brett was brought into an emergency meeting to explain what happened. He couldn't explain it. He didn't understand our systems well enough to know where the error had originated. Catherine called me into the meeting. She asked me to walk through what went wrong. I explained that one of our data feeds had a periodic timing issue. Historical data would sometimes overwrite current data during the feed refresh. I'd been monitoring for this manually and fixing it when it occurred. I'd documented the issue months ago and recommended we rebuild that particular data pipeline. But it was never prioritized. Catherine asked why I hadn't caught this instance of the problem. I said I was no longer doing manual data quality checks outside my assigned tasks. That had been extra work I'd been doing voluntarily. The room went silent. Brett tried to recover. He said I should have escalated that the manual checks were necessary. I said I had escalated. Multiple times, I'd sent emails to both him and Catherine recommending we allocate resources to fix underlying infrastructure issues. I pulled up the emails on my laptop, showed them, dated over the past 2 years. Catherine looked at Brett. Brett looked at his notes. I was excused from the meeting. 2 days later, then Catherine announced that Brett was being moved to a different role, strategic planning. He was being replaced as lead analyst by one of the other team members. Catherine asked if I'd be willing to take on additional responsibilities to help stabilize the data operations. She offered me a 10% raise. I said I'd need to think about it. That night, I got a call from a recruiter. She said she'd been referred to me by someone in my network. A healthcare tech company was looking for a director of analytics. They were building their data infrastructure from scratch. She said she'd heard I was one of the best data architects in Chicago. I didn't know who'd referred me. I didn't ask. I just scheduled an interview. The healthcare company was called MedBridge Solutions. They were a startup that had just raised Series B funding. They needed someone to build an entire data operation. I met with their CEO, a former doctor named Sarah Kim. She was direct and unpretentious. She said they had ambitious growth plans, but zero data infrastructure. They needed someone who could build it right. I showed her examples of what I'd built at Horizon, the dashboards, the reporting systems, the predictive models. Sarah's eyes lit up. She said this was exactly what they needed. She offered me the director role. Significant salary increase, equity, full authority over data strategy, a team budget to hire people. I said I needed a week to think about it. I went back to Horizon and requested a meeting with Catherine. I said I'd considered her offer. I appreciated it, but I'd realized I needed a change. I was giving 4 weeks' notice. Catherine was shocked. Night she asked where I was going. I said I'd accepted a director of analytics role at another company. Catherine said she could match any offer, increase my title, give me real leadership authority. I said it wasn't about the offer. It was about starting fresh somewhere that valued my contributions from day one. Catherine asked me to reconsider. She said Horizon needed me. My departure would create serious operational challenges. I said I understood. That's why I was giving 4 weeks instead of 2. I'd document everything thoroughly. Catherine said 4 weeks wasn't enough. She needed at least 3 months to transition someone into my role. I said respectfully that I was offering 4 weeks. That was my decision. She threatened to withhold my final paycheck if I didn't agree to a longer transition. I said that would be illegal, and I'd fulfilled my contractual obligations by giving notice. If she wanted to make this contentious, I could leave immediately. We settled on 4 weeks. I spent those 4 weeks creating documentation, real comprehensive documentation, every system, every process, every data pipeline, but I also made sure the documentation was accurate about the limitations and problems, all the infrastructure debt I'd been manually managing, all the fragile workarounds keeping things running. I made it crystal clear that maintaining Horizon's data operation required either significant infrastructure investment or someone willing to work 70-hour weeks indefinitely. The new analysts were terrified. They depended on me to answer questions and fix problems. Now they'd have to actually understand the systems themselves. So Catherine tried one more time to convince me to stay. She offered me Brett's old title, lead analyst, a larger raise. I said no thank you. My decision was made. My last day at Horizon was a Friday. No one threw me a party. Catherine didn't give a speech. I just cleaned out my desk and left. I felt lighter than I had in years. MedBridge Solutions was everything Horizon wasn't. Sarah valued my expertise. She listened when I recommended approaches. She gave me resources to build things properly. I hired a team of 4 analysts in my first 2 months. I taught them to think systematically about data infrastructure. I made sure they understood not just how to use the systems, but why they were designed that way. I worked reasonable hours. I left at 6 most days. I had time to go to the gym, cook actual meals, date again. And I started seeing someone named Alex, a teacher I met through friends. We'd have dinner and actually talk about things other than work. I'd forgotten what that felt like. 3 months after I left Horizon, I got a text from one of the analysts who still worked there. She said things were falling apart. The data systems were unstable. Reports were constantly wrong. Clients were complaining. Catherine had hired 3 contractors to try to replace me. None of them could figure out how my systems worked. I didn't respond. It wasn't my problem anymore. 6 months after I left, I heard through my network that Horizon had lost 2 major clients. Both cited data reliability issues as a primary reason for leaving. One was the big retail account, the $15 million client that I'd helped win with my analysis. They'd left because Horizon couldn't deliver accurate campaign performance reports. The data was too messy, too unreliable. Catherine had been demoted. She was no longer SVP. She was back to VP of Analytics, reporting to someone else. The new leadership was trying to rebuild the data infrastructure from scratch. It was estimated to be an 18-month project. Everything I'd built in 3 years was being thrown out because they couldn't maintain it. I should have felt vindicated. Mostly, I just felt sad. It didn't have to be this way. MedBridge kept growing. My data infrastructure supported the company through aggressive scaling. We went from 30 employees when I joined to 200 in 18 months. Sarah promoted me to VP of Data and Analytics. She gave me equity increases. She publicly credited my work in board meetings and company all hands. She treated me like a valuable contributor instead of a disposable resource. My team grew to 15 people. We built best-in-class analytics capabilities. Healthcare organizations wanted to work with MedBridge specifically because of our data insights. I won an industry award for analytics leadership. I was invited to speak at conferences. I became known as someone who built great data teams. All the recognition I'd never gotten at Horizon came flooding in somewhere else. 2 years after leaving Horizon, I ran into Catherine at an industry event. She looked tired. She'd left Horizon 6 months earlier. She was consulting now. She approached me hesitantly. She said she'd followed my career, congratulated me on my success. I thanked her politely. While she said she'd been reflecting on her time at Horizon, she realized she'd made mistakes. She'd taken my work for granted. She'd failed to advocate for me. She asked if I'd ever consider getting coffee to discuss opportunities to work together. I said I appreciated the offer, but I was happy where I was. Catherine nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. We parted professionally. I haven't heard from her since. MedBridge raised Series C funding at a valuation of $500 million. My equity became worth real money, not life-changing wealth, but significant. More importantly, I'd built something I was genuinely proud of. A data operation that worked efficiently, a team culture based on mutual respect, a sustainable approach to excellent work. I thought about all those nights I'd stayed late at Horizon, all those hours I'd given to a company that saw me as replaceable. They'd been so focused on my output that they never noticed I was the entire foundation their success was built on. When I left, the foundation crumbled, not because I sabotaged anything, but because they'd never invested in making the infrastructure sustainable. They just relied on me to hold it together through sheer force of will. That's what happens when companies treat people as disposable. They lose not just the person, but everything that person was invisibly maintaining. Horizon is still in business. They've recovered somewhat under new leadership, but they never got back to where they were when I was there. Then they learned an expensive lesson about the difference between someone who's invisible and someone who's irreplaceable. I learned a different lesson, that staying late and working hard only matters if it's valued. That excellent work for indifferent people is just volunteering to be exploited. I tell my team at MedBridge now, go home at reasonable hours, Build systems that don't require heroic effort to maintain. Create documentation so no one person is a single point of failure. Build things that last, not things that depend on someone sacrificing their life. That's how you create real value, not through grinding yourself down, but through sustainable excellence. Jamie reached out to me last year. She'd heard about my success. She said she was happy for me. She said leaving me had been painful but necessary for both of us. Now, she was right. I'd needed to lose everything to realize I'd been investing in the wrong things. Now I invest in work that values my contributions, relationships that honor my time, a life that actually feels like living. Horizon didn't notice what I was really doing when I stayed late every night. They thought I was just being a dedicated employee. I was actually being someone who'd forgotten that my life belonged to me, not to them. When I finally remembered that, everything changed. They noticed too late. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.